Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Kaizen Event Case Studies webinar. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying the beginning of spring. It's been a long winter across the globe, and it looks like it's starting to break everywhere, so welcome, and happy pre-Easter for those of you who celebrate Easter. So what I'd like to do is just do a quick show of hands and make sure that you're able to hear me okay. If you could please raise your little hand on the control panel and let me know that you can hear me loud and clear. Excellent. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to put your hands down now and we'll get going. All right, so thank you to all of you that are across the globe. There are quite a few of you that are either very late in the evening or very, very early in the morning. Good morning, Australia. It's quite early there, and I welcome you and thank you for joining us from all across the globe. What we'd like to do today is, I know that the invitation mentioned Kaizen Event case studies, plural. I actually would like to talk about just one case study because it was such a unique Kaizen event, and I've talked about different Kaizen events over the years so much that I thought it might be nice to talk about one very specific Kaizen event that's recent and just was very different. And the other thing I wanted to also mention is that this is not going to be a webinar where we go into all of the details of how to plan, execute, and do the follow-up for a Kaizen event. This is really about focusing on the case study. So those of you who aren't aware, I do have a book that I co-authored with Mike Osterling called the Kaizen Event Planner. It's a pretty extensive book. It really was a total brain dump of everything that Mike and I do when we're planning an event, when we're executing an event. The only thing it doesn't go into is all the specific tools that you could be using to solve problems, because each one of those tools is a book in and of itself. So it's a how-to for executing Kaizen events, and you can see that on Amazon, on my website, whatever, and that also has a CD in it. I just want to show you really quickly. The CD, hang on, let me get this over here. Let's see. There we go. So the CD has a bunch of Excel-based tools that you can use to plan, execute, and do follow-up for Kaizen events. So there's a charter. Again, I'm not going to go into all the details of these things today. Planning checklist, a little tool you can use for forming the team so you don't forget people, different functions, a supplies checklist for those of you who are new to this, a communication tool that you could use to start looking at who you should be communicating what to and when, an execution checklist for the actual day or days that you're holding the Kaizen event, a document that you can house ideas that either are being approached and addressed during the Kaizen event or possibly some things for a parking lot list for later, an event report that you can use. This is our version of an A3 that can give you just at a glance summary of a Kaizen event. Sustainability plan, this is probably the most critical tab on this entire CD, or it's available by download if you buy the electronic version of Kaizen Event Planner. This plan isn't a prescriptive plan in terms of what specifically you need to do. It just asks a lot of questions, and you have to answer those questions based on the particular improvement that you made, your environment, the leadership maturity level. There's a lot of variables environmentally that go into how you should create a sustainability plan. But most improvements are at great risk of failure unless you have a pretty thorough sustainability plan. There's a document to house the few tasks that have to be completed up within the first 30 days after the Kaizen event in order to have the improvement fully stick. And there's a parking lot document that you can use. And is there more? Yeah, there we go. Team presentation agenda. This is for the final presentation if you want some help in knowing what to talk about. Post-event activities, these are different activities like making sure the sustainability plan is being followed, doing some process audits to make sure that the process improvements are sticking, etc. And then there's a 60-day audit as well, so 30 and 60-day audits. And that is all the tools that I'm not going to go into on this Kaizen event. But you can look on our website and on YouTube that I'm going to be able to I'm not going to go into all the details, but there are quite a few webinars that we've done that give you all these details. All right, so on to today's agenda. Most of you are familiar at this point of the stage what the word Kaizen means. Kai is two Chinese words together that means continuous improvement, more or less. That's the U.S. English interpretation of that. What I'd like to point out here is that there's a distinct difference between Kaizen and Kaizen events. And Kaizen is a general umbrella term for continuous improvement. So technically, anything that you do that you're making any sort of improvement falls under the umbrella of Kaizen. Kaizen events are very specific execution models for rapid improvement, also known as Kaizen Blitz, Kaizen workshops. You can hear them referred to. Rapid improvement events, RIEs, is a term that you'll hear in healthcare a lot and in some other industries. And so Kaizen events are a specific type of Kaizen. What a lot of people say that rubs some of us in the improvement world a little wrong is, we're going to do a Kaizen. We're going to have a Kaizen. And it's really, may feel like it's splitting hairs, but it's a very improper use of the term Kaizen. So please always make sure that you follow the word Kaizen with event, blitz, or workshop if, in fact, rapid improvement activities are what you're talking about. That just helps clarify and get everyone clear on the difference between overall Kaizen and Kaizen events. The other thing that I think is a misunderstanding that I'd like to talk about for a few minutes here is the fact that we see a lot of Kaizen events, and we've been seeing it for years and years. We continue to see a lot of Kaizen events that are what we call, drive-by Kaizens or kamikaze Kaizen events. Some people call them random acts of Kaizen, where there's just this isolated event that isn't really tied to anything larger. And while all improvement serves some purpose, it really shortchanges you in not being able to tie it to a larger strategy. You'll get a lot more bang for your buck if you are, in fact, tying to strategy. So what this means is you have to have a leadership, eye on what's going on with improvement. And if you're a very kind of junior level person in an organization trying to lead improvement, you will tend to do these improvements in isolation and not tie them to the overall business plan and business goals for the year, where you'll get much, much greater improvement results. You'll be able to to prove the fact that, you're doing something that ties to a larger picture and is more impressive to leaders would be in connecting those two. So if you don't know what your annual business goals are for the year, for example, some of you are fairly junior on the line, find out what they are and make sure that you're prioritizing your improvement so that you're more likely to be making improvement directly tied to the business goals for the year. So when I say tie it to something larger, what we mean by that is either tying it to a very big problem that's being solved, ideally through using A3 management, or through a large-scale value stream transformation that's going forward. So let me give you a couple of examples of these. This is a value stream map for a service industry, and in this particular, this is a future state map. What you'll see are these jagged Kaizen bursts, which show all the different improvement that need to be made. And what you'll notice here using this color coding legend, the blue outlined ones are Kaizen events. So those are improvements that lend themselves very well to a Kaizen event. And the brown ones are those that are really much more of a project-based type of improvement. So the way we tend to think about it is that all the way on the very simple side, there are things that we refer to as just do it's, where it doesn't require much analysis and planning and design and testing. It doesn't necessarily require a cross-functional team. They're just simple little improvements that you can do in a matter of hours. We call those just do it's. Kaizen events are those improvements that need days. So typically 2 to 5 days is the Kaizen event norm. You can have a day-long Kaizen event. You can even have a 4-hour Kaizen event and use the principles of a Kaizen event to accomplish something. But most of them are 2 to 5 days. And so those are the days-long improvements. And then the weeks or months-long improvements are those that require more traditional projects. So you'll see here that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these that are well suited for Kaizen events, and that doesn't necessarily mean 6 Kaizen events. It could be 2 Kaizen events where 3 and 3 of these are being handled. It could be 4 Kaizen events where there's 2, 2, and 1, 1. It could be, rarely could you handle them all in one Kaizen event, but you could. In some value stream maps, we've been able to do quite a bit in one Kaizen event. But that's what we mean by looking at the type of improvement and deciding up front if it's well suited for rapid improvement or not. Now, when you take a look at A3, oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to show you something else. This is a new kind of version of transformation plans that we've been doing to be a little more visual than the Excel tool that some of you have seen. This particular transformation plan is, about a 9-month, 10-month cycle. And what you'll see here is that we started in February with value stream mapping of one product family, and then this month finished value stream mapping for a second product family that are closely related but different enough that they really required 2 different value stream maps. And then what you'll see here in orange or red are these Kaizen events that are going to be stretched out throughout the time period. RPEs is a term that a client of mine actually dubbed many, many years ago when they were doing this rapid improvement activity that was a 3-day activity, but they weren't making actual improvement in the middle of the event. And I said to them, well, that would not be a Kaizen event. Kaizen means change, and so you are making improvement within the boundaries of the Kaizen event in order to call it a real Kaizen event. What you're doing is actually a rapid planning event, and I think there's tremendous value in a rapid planning event. I just think it's important to differentiate between a Kaizen event and something where you're coming out of the event with just a plan that then has to be executed or implemented. That's not a Kaizen event, not in the traditional sense anyway. So Kaizen events, you make actual improvement during the 2 to 5 days. Rapid planning event, very similar in structure, but you're coming out with a plan or a design rather than actually implementing in the event. So we've got a couple of RPEs going on. And then down here you'll see some projects. A lot of these are IT heavy, and they're projects that are starting and ending. You can see the different Gantt-ish version of it. Project 1 and 2 happen to be very, very closely related, but we need a month of downtime in the middle in order to continue on, and it's a little bit of a new project. And they string, all the way through to the beginning of November, where we figure we'll need a little bit of time and bandwidth to just sew up all the last-minute details and then have a very, very thorough reflection on this first cycle of improvement. So this is a gigantic cycle of improvement. It's for an entire value stream, and that's why it takes so many months to get it accomplished. Now, if you take a look at a 3 report that represents plan, do, study, adjust problem solving for very, very big problems, this particular A3 was a custodial group, and they were looking to create quite a bit of standard work to get better cleaning and more consistent cleaning across this very, very large area that they were responsible for. And so you don't see Kaizen events mentioned here, but this red outlined area shows the 4 items that they were making improvements to that were being done or were done actually through using a Kaizen event. And in this case, they had 2 separate Kaizen events. And so one of the things they came out with that you can kind of see here is a laminated set of cards with standard work about specific elements of the cleaning process. Some of it was process related and some of it were more standards for how they should be cleaning. And that became their job aid for everybody to keep consistent on how they were doing their cleaning. So a Kaizen event could be part of an A3 in that you decide that when you're in the execution model or mode, you want to have rapid improvement be part of the cycle. So when do you do a Kaizen event? Let's talk about that for a moment. So there are, and this was a slide that unfortunately I lost right before I went live on this webinar, but let me just talk through it. So the main reasons to do it are when you want the power of focus to be present. So what happens in the real world is that we get very distracted, and that's why projects take so long to get done, because people are meeting once a week or twice a week, and then life intervenes in between, and then when you get together you have to remember where you were, and it takes a long time to get work done when you operate that way. So a Kaizen event gives you this wonderful freedom to pull people together and have them do nothing else but one thing and get one thing done well. And so the focus part of Kaizen events are one of the big advantages. Another reason to do Kaizen events are because there needs to be a pretty decent cross-functional group of people. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use a project format to get cross-functional people together, but you tend to get greater cooperation, collaboration, and healing relationships, frankly, when you're kind of locked in a room and you're going out to the Gemba and coming back to this room and you're focused for a tight period of time. You tend to get better cooperation and understanding between different functional areas. So Kaizen events are wonderful for that. Another thing is if you just need fast results. Sometimes it just is a matter of, look, we can take 3 months to get this done, or we can bang it out in 3 days. So rapid results are a big benefit of Kaizen events. Another thing is when you want to teach people PDSA in a more compressed environment. So plan, do, study, adjust, or plan, do, check, act, many of you may use. Some of you may use DMAIC as well. Whatever format you're using for a scientific method of problem solving, there's a nice benefit of having up to 10 people max in a room. So, 6 to 10 people that you're indoctrinating into plan, do, study, adjust, and walking them through that cycle in a compressed period of time. So there's a big advantage there. And then the other thing is that there's a fair amount of cultural shifting that can occur in a Kaizen event that doesn't seem to occur as effectively and efficiently in a traditional project. So you can talk about different, obstacles and barriers to success and leadership behaviors and mindsets and organizational paradigms and industry paradigms. You can talk about those more effectively in a Kaizen event and work through some of them much more quickly than you would otherwise. So, some of you asked when you registered, well, how do you know when you want to have a Kaizen event? I would say that anything can be done in project format, anything. I mean, that's how we operated long before we, heard about Toyota, and then Kaizen events were kind of a U.S. manufactured version of making rapid improvement. So, we existed for decades and decades and decades making, getting successful improvement made, but it wasn't as fast and possibly not as effective. So you can use Kaizen events for anything that can be done in a short amount of time and, benefits from that power of focus. So let's take a look at what's happening with PDSA, because I'd like to, make sure we understand Kaizen events' proper place in the whole continuum of improvement that goes on in organizations. Ideally, your organization or those you work with, if you're a consultant, are adopting strategy deployment as a business management model. And strategy deployment, also known as Hoshinkanri, using Japanese terms, is a very, very big look, macro strategic look to what needs to occur to move the business toward its strategy. So it's called strategy deployment, assuming that there is a clear strategy and you're deploying that strategy. Typically is in an annual work cycle, annual fiscal year cycle, and that would be an example of this very large outer macro plan, do, study, adjust cycle. And then it could be that that strategy deployment plan that is part of the outcome of the strategy deployment sessions. It could be that one of the things that's discovered is that there's a number of issues in a particular value stream that are kind of hanging up the organization, and it's difficult to execute the strategy without cleaning up that value stream. In that case, you're talking about value stream mapping now occupying this, one level down, and it's more of the, mid-level plan, do, study, adjust cycle. But as you can see from the previous slide I showed with that timeline, it can be a 9, 10, 11, 12-month cycle. So it's a big cycle of PDSA. And then within that, if you choose to use Kaizen events and the projects as well become, a smaller microcycle within this larger, excuse me, value stream transformation cycle. Excuse me. And so it becomes micro, and then even within a Kaizen event or a project, there's even another little cycle, which is kind of hard to get another little one in here, but there's another little one when you're making actual improvements. So the individual improvements themselves form their own PDSA cycle. So, it's one of those things where it's kind of a fractal view, if you're familiar with fractals, of how you go from macro to micro in making improvement. Let me see. I just have a quick question here. How do we accomplish projects? I mean the methodology. So I'm not going to really talk a whole lot about projects in this webinar, but project management is a whole methodology in and of itself. It's just a matter of being very, very clear on the objectives and putting timeframes in place, budgets in place, managing to those timeframes and budgets, making adjustments only when absolutely necessary and not because someone's whim of the day decided that we should do something different, that type of thing. So just projects have been around forever, so it's just a matter of getting better and better at managing them. And this is out of scope for the event today, or the webinar today. So let's take a look at the general structure of a Kaizen event. One of the things that I mentioned before is it can be 2 to 5 days. So this happens to be the structure for a 3-day Kaizen event. I tend to run 3, 4, and 4.5 day events more than anything. I've done a couple 2 days. I've done some 5s, but the 5-day events are really long and very tiring, and a lot of people just start burning out at about day 4.5, and so I haven't been doing any 5 days lately. And the typical structure as far as plan, do, study, adjust is that day 1 is almost always occupied just in the plan phase, where you're understanding the current state and determining the root causes for that current state, maybe getting into designing the future state. It may be that you're moving that into day 2 a little bit. And then we are huge fans of having interim briefings on several of the days in the Kaizen event. I often skip the first day. Lately I've been skipping it a little more than I used to because sometimes the team takes the whole day to really kind of gel and start getting great success and momentum going and results to share. And so I don't always have an interim briefing on day 1 anymore. I'd say it's probably 70% no, 30% yes now. And it just depends on what I think the team can get accomplished on day 1, whether or not I think it's worth having a briefing with the leaders of the areas that are going to be changed by the improvement that aren't on the team. Day 2 is a little more focused on the do and study. So this is where the design and testing phase of whatever the improvement's going to be goes on. And a fair amount of buy-in is obtained on day 2 as well. Now, some of the Kaizen events, the buy-in has actually been kind of granted to the team. So in other words, if you have representatives representing a functional area, and if the people that are outside of the team have been given the opportunity prior to the Kaizen event to contribute their ideas, observe problems, give suggestions for improvements and all of that, which we highly recommend. If they've been able to do all that, then very often we don't really take the buy-in piece outside of the Kaizen event in the middle of the Kaizen event, because in those cases that functional area has pretty much delegated their authority to the people that are on the team representing that function. So it just depends on to what degree there's been that upfront involvement on whether you need that. And then I recommend absolutely an interim briefing at day 2 so that you can keep everyone kind of moving along together, and if there are any concerns that leaders have, they're able to raise them real time instead of waiting for the improvement to be all the way implemented and then say, I'm concerned about this. So then on day 3, at that point, you've done some testing, you've kind of worked out some of the bugs, and you need to finalize it, and then it's time to roll it out. So again, improvement, it needs to be implemented during the Kaizen event, not after the Kaizen event. So you're training people in the Kaizen event. If there are people that are out on vacation or just taking a day off, then you can do that training as soon as they get back, and that's part of the 30-day plan, is that you may have a couple of people you need to catch up with and get them trained. But more or less, the day after the Kaizen event, the process is being done a new way, or the environment, the physical work environment is different. So it's rapid improvement. And then, we recommend that you have some sort of a celebration at the end of it. Also, sometimes the briefing attendees, it's a larger group sometimes for the final day of a Kaizen event so that the team can present to a larger number of people. But celebration is a good thing because it's hard work, those Kaizen events, and the people need to be honored for the work that they did. So now on to, that's just, a brief overview for some of you that are kind of new to Kaizen events. There's, again, a lot more to learn about planning and executing this, and the planning part is the biggest element. It's a 4 to 6 week planning cycle typically for Kaizen events. But let's move on to this unique situation that I just had recently that I thought would be good to share with you. So this is a case study where there was a value stream transformation plan, or there is a value stream transformation plan in the works. And the problem for this particular Kaizen event was that this happens to be a manufacturer, and most of you know that I don't work with manufacturing a ton, but this happens to be a manufacturer. And this is a sales-related Kaizen event, which is why I wanted to share it. And I think a lot of people are afraid to apply lean to sales, but this is just a great opportunity to showcase how effective lean can be in the sales arena. The problem here was that their customer base was giving them very uneven orders, and most of the time we think we can't do anything to change customer behavior, and we all think that it's all about the customer, and sometimes companies can get stuck in this thinking where, well, we can't do anything about that. Well, I always say, not so fast. I bet there is something you can do about it, and you'll see that there is indeed. So here's an example. This is their future state map. It's been sanitized, and I've changed quite a bit on this map, so it's unrecognizable. In the current state, it took 3.5 days. This particular organization builds to inventory, and it took 3.5 days from the time a customer requested the order until they received, or until the delivery process began. So it's basically until the truck was loaded. So 3.5 days current state. Future state, they wanted to cut 2 days out of that and get it down to a day and a half, and they're pretty darn close already of getting it to a day and a half. Up here you'll see Kaizen bursts. These are all the different improvements that need to be made, and we did not color code this particular map based on whether it's a Kaizen event, a project, or just do it. This map actually doesn't have any just do it's, but they do have a fair number of projects. So what the color coding here means is, the lime green one is one that's complete and the goal that was set was exceeded. So in this case, they wanted to reduce this particular setup time from 4 hours to 3 hours, and they actually got it to 2.5 already. So that's why that's lime green. And then eventually, well, there's one here, goal met, the complete, that's the voice of the customer. They got up here regarding shipment. And then eventually there'll be a lot that are aqua, if they're going to be done in pilot form. And then you'll see that the yellow ones are all in progress and the orange ones have not started yet. So this is a longer improvement cycle. And the particular Kaizen event we were working on is this one right here, which is level customer demand to 25% orders each week. So trying to get a little more level demand so it didn't make the production and inventory people crazy with wild swings. This particular value stream map also has if you'll notice here, you have the transporter, you have the truck being loaded here, and the truck is going to the customer. So the loop from customer order to delivery is pretty small here. It's just boxes 2, 3, 4, and 5, process blocks. From this point on, it's about collecting cash and paying commission to the sales team. So this whole half of the map is about the cash cycle, which is 40 days in the future state. So this is a full kind of quote to cash situation, which not everyone does, but we've been doing more and more of that, especially since our value stream mapping book came out last year. We've been being requested to do larger value streams. I'm going to go ahead and take a couple quick questions here related to this slide. Is there any difference between A3 problem solving and value stream transformation or mapping? Yes, and Amir, if you can remind me if I forget to mention this at the end of the webinar, I have a slide that I'll try to find that I just created for another client that I'll pull up that shows that relationship. And then the other question is, this VSM has no name, any particular reason? Yeah, confidentiality. This happens to be a client that doesn't really want their name out there, so it's a manufacturing operation. That's all I can say about this particular value stream map. So let's move on. We see our Kaizen event right up here. Oh, and one more thing. You'll see here this dotted line. This is not a value stream mapping webinar, but I just want to point out that this is a pull icon. So they're going to create a pull system from inventory to production planning. So instead of being forecast-based, they're going to have a full pull system in, and we're going to be doing that in June, installing a pull system so that they don't have to be predicting based on forecasts, which are hardly ever accurate. I mean, that's true in most manufacturers, that forecasting's pretty tricky to get real good at. So that's going to be that one. The arrows at the bottom are new to me. Where's the timeline? Ooh, good question, Ahmad. So on this particular value stream map, there were a couple of variables in the timeline that this is from iGraphics. It's called Flowcharter, and it has a lot of flexibility, but one thing it doesn't really allow you to do is to chunk up the value stream map into different pieces, and we really wanted to do that for this. So we just took the timeline off. Actually, if you can, I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of behind here, and we used white ink on it to make it sort of disappear, because we really wanted to just show the lead time, because this was a lead time related value stream map. So that's why you're not seeing that. And that it is unusual for me to not have a timeline on a value stream map. Very unusual. So thank you for noticing that. Okay, so let's take a look at the charter. So in this particular case, remember they need to level load the incoming customer orders, or at least explore whether they can level load them. So what they decided to do was look at product family number 1. And what the current state issues were that the sales team was incentive to achieve end-of-the-month sales goals, which they suspected but weren't sure before the Kaizen event could be one of the root causes for these end-of-the-month spikes. And their spikes were pretty dramatic in that the last week of the month, they had about 40% of their full volume for the entire month on that last week. And the week prior to that, they had about 30%. So the last 2 weeks of the month, they had 70% of their volume. And so you can imagine how much this, there's 3 things that we try to reduce in lean. There's muda, which is waste, M-U-D-A. There's mura, which is unevenness, which in this case is uneven orders, and muri, which is the, oh my gosh, why am I blanking at this moment? Unevenness, oh my gosh, overburden of people and equipment. So any kind of overburden is is the Muri part of it. So Mura is a big problem, and a lot of people forget about Mura, but you do want to level out and smooth everything that you can so that you're not having operational swings in staffing and overtime, in supplies needed, in stress, the whole bit that unevenness creates. So the other thing is that the customers had gotten wise to the fact that the sales team had end-of-the-month quotas that they had to reach in order to get commission or their sales incentive. And so the customers started bargaining for extra discounts the last week of the month in order to help the salesperson meet their quota, but that was starting to erode the margins on in the profit on the product. And so this organization really wanted to see if there was anything they could do to get rid of that problem as well. So goal is to level the demand to 25% each week. There were a couple of potential deliverables they thought might happen, like a new incentive plan could come out of it, but they weren't sure. And then they knew that whatever came out of it, people would have to be trained. Now take a look at this. Take a look at the kinds of people that were on this team. We have a director of sales. This is what's unusual. Most Kaizen events don't have directors on them. And the only Kaizen events where I recommend managers and above, or a heavy representation of managers and above on the Kaizen team, are when there are going to be policy level decisions being made. So Kaizen events can be very, very tactical and very micro and very detail oriented. And in that case, the front lines, the people that do the work, are absolutely the people who should be on the team. And many of you have heard me preaching this over the years. And most of the teams are, in fact, frontline people with 1 or 2 supervisors or managers. But in this case, you'll notice that there are a number of managers and there's a director on the team because they really needed to think through the policy of how they incent people in order to make some improvements. So a little higher level on this team. There were two, field sales reps, so that's the front line there. We see logistics, demand planning, and production all present, and that's because the unevenness is, really weighing on them the most of everybody. And then we've got this business development coordinator because they represent voice of the customer, the financial analyst because there are some financial implications of changing an incentive plan, and an IT supervisor because we just felt that there was a good chance that we were going to need some pretty heavy lifting to get data during the Kaizen event, and indeed we did, and indeed she was phenomenal, and we could not have gotten done with the Kaizen event without her. So it was really a good call to have her on the team. And then there were some people on call that I don't think we ever called. And yeah, I don't think we did. So let's move on. Day one, what happened? So most Kaizen event teams I try to get to in advance and do an overview that's a little bit about what is a Kaizen event, what's it going to be structured like, how's it going to feel, what's your role as a team member, what's my role as a facilitator, how's this going to go down, what are the rules of engagement. So we have some suggested rules of engagement like, devices are off. We'll take breaks so you can get emails done. There's the thing about we want to use creativity before capital. We want to also, have the wisdom mentality, meaning that if someone isn't the expert in a particular part of the work, they still have wisdom through being a person and having experience that they could provide some great insights, especially into the future state. So there's a little bit of rules of engagement and all of that. Try to do that in advance. I don't always pull it off because sometimes people can't get the team together, and in this case, they could not get the team together, so we ended up doing that Kaizen event overview at the beginning of day one. Now, the other training need, and it's a pretty big development need during Kaizen events, is on specific elements of what you're doing. So, for example, jumping down to the current state, if there's a tool that's needed to understand the current state that the team has never used, then the facilitator needs to basically show them what it is and help them learn how to use it real time. Same with root cause analysis. If it's, if the problem to be solved is screaming for a particular kind of root cause analysis or a tool that people hadn't used, then you would want to do some teaching and make sure that they understand how to use it there. So there's real-time, just-in-time learning and training that's going on during the Kaizen event. So you can't always include that up front because you don't know necessarily what needs to be trained. So then the other thing is we always go through the charter review one more time very, very carefully because you want people to walk into the event very clear on what their mission is, and if there are any boundaries, so you see here event boundaries and limitations, it says none. In this case, the leadership gave the team free rein to really design what they thought was best, and then there was going to be a vetting process within the Kaizen event to run it by leadership, which is also unusual. In a Kaizen event, very often leaders don't really get to veto any of the ideas. But we went into this Kaizen event knowing that there was, because it was high level and had big financial implications and it had a lot of policy and HR components to it, human resources, that there was going to be a vetting process to make sure leadership agreed with the plan. The other thing, I just saw a question come in about this charter and how it looks very similar to the value stream mapping charter. They are very similar. If you compare them very carefully, you'll see some differences, but they are fairly similar. So yes, they are very similar. There are subtle differences though. Like potential deliverables is not on a value stream map. So the charter. All right, so back to day one. So you're really, this is an investigation, and so there's not a prescribed cookie cutter that you can say, every Kaizen event on day one, we're going to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. It just doesn't work that way. Every problem's different. Every potential path that you have to take to understand the current state is different. So you'll see at the end I have a list of all the possible means for understanding the current state. But I mean, it can be everything from swim lane style process mapping to going out to, well, you always try to go to the Gemba, so that goes without saying. But then in terms of what you're doing in the room, it could be process level mapping, it could be analyzing videotape, it could be analyzing data, it could be looking at existing job aids and processes that are in writing already. It could be interviewing people. You could be going out and interviewing, which we did during this Kaizen event. So there's lots of different things that you have, available to you to help the team understand the current state. And then in this case, we did have an interim at the end of day one because this was such a kind of high stakes Kaizen event that we didn't want to get too far ahead of ourselves before getting leadership feedback and buy-in. So let's talk about current state. Okay, hang on. Let me go back. There was a question, why no process mapping? So I'm going to actually ask a rhetorical question since we're not having an in-person conversation here. Why, if the issue is there's end-of-the-month spikes, and the goal of the Kaizen event is to smooth out those spikes, why would you consider process mapping? So my question is, what's the purpose of process mapping? And this is something that, people that are new to improvement will often, think that everything needs to be process mapped. Well, what needs to be process mapped are process steps that need to be evaluated and possibly changed. And in this case, it's not necessarily a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5 type of situation. It's really more of a policy, a methodology, a scheme, if you were, that needs to be altered. And so, process mapping is very commonly done in a Kaizen event. I'd say 70%, but 30% of the time, let's say that you've got a quality problem. It may not be process related at all. It may be that the standards aren't clear. And so, you may not need to do mapping in that case either. So there's lots of different kinds of improvements that don't require process maps. And you just have to think very carefully about what problem you're trying to solve and what's the best vehicle to get you there. And then there's another comment here. One of the other items we've based current state analysis off of is an FMEA, failure modes effect analysis, where there are numerous defects. Yes, absolutely. If you are moving into a quality-related Kaizen event and there's been failures and you want to be able to analyze them right then and there, absolutely. FMEA looked at during the Kaizen event or before, either one of those would be helpful. Okay, the next question is, wouldn't process map help you with your waste walk? Well, so let's go back to what's the purpose of this particular Kaizen event. The only thing that we're trying to solve, it's a very narrowly focused Kaizen event, is we're trying to get rid of the overburden of the unevenness that occurs with sales orders. So we're not necessarily looking to reduce waste. So this is another thing I see a lot with beginning people in Lean, is that everything's a waste walk and everything's about waste reduction. Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're trying to reduce the waste of what? When you have an uneven situation, what are the wastes that you have? If you suddenly have very high demand and then very low demand, what kinds of waste does that create? So I'll just give you a couple in this case. Excessive overtime. So then you have overburden of people that really would like to not be working excessive hours. We've got the potential for increased quality problems because they're rushing, because of the heavy work volumes. We've got equipment failures because the equipment is having to go at a pace that it's not necessarily designed to do. We've got some safety issues because of the overburden and the rushing that occurs during an overburden situation. We've got inventory fluctuations, so there's excess movement within the warehouse because of these swings. So I can go on and on and on. Yes, underutilization of people, yes, yes, yes. But there was no waste walk done in this Kaizen event, nor should there have been. So I hope that I'm being clear on, there are process-related Kaizen events, there are work standards-related Kaizen events, there are policy-related Kaizen events. There's all kinds of reasons to put people together in one place at one time and focus on the mission at hand. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, and then we can these are good questions, so keep them coming. Okay, so in the current state analysis, in this case, what we decided very strategically was not to do the analysis up front. And so this is something I'm asked a lot is, how do you know how much data to collect up front? What I do as a facilitator is I have a very good idea going into an event, what's available, what's not available. You know, I call it what's gettable, what's not gettable, how fast we can get it. And then if it's something that's going to be fairly easy to get during the Kaizen event, we actually get it during the Kaizen event so that the people on the team can learn how to be thoughtful about what data they want, and then they can go through the process of learning how to request it so that they're being clear about what they need. And you know, a lot of times people ask for data and they're not clear and they don't get what they think they're getting. And then they can also learn how to analyze it together. So there's a lot of learning in that you rob the team of if you do all that analysis up front. Now that said, you have to make sure that you're not leaving all of the analysis for the Kaizen event and you'll run out of time, because you want them to be able to get through to being able to, you know, make an improvement, design an actual improvement. So, you know, you have to just use your judgment on how much to get up front. In this case, we got some general ideas up front, and we did all the data analysis in the event. So, for example, this was one analysis that the woman who was with IT did on the first day. The team came up with this. They said, you know, we want to look at the actual volumes so we can see how much of a swing really is there. I mean, we know that it's, you know, people were saying that it's 70% in the last 2 weeks, but we want to see it. So she did this quick analysis for this is two key customers, blue and red. And you'll see, sure enough, you know, very repeated pattern of these ends. Now, it's not consistent, but fairly consistent. End of the month spikes, spike, 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 spike. So and they're pretty dramatic. So the team was like, okay, this is an investigation, good data. Then they decided, let's look at a couple of customers and do month end and month out, and month end and month out, and look at it over a longer period of time by month, or not a longer period of time, but let's look at it by month. And something very, very new revealed itself. This is what's lovely about investigations. In this case, they see this year-long look at the orders, and you'll see that there's spikes, 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 that when I said, why are there spikes? Why is this? They're like, oh my gosh, those are when we give customers rebates. So the customers were, in some cases, we had voice of the customer that clearly said, well, we don't even order. We just wait for the rebates. And so, you know, this is one of those cases where you're starting to see that customer patterns are being set by internal policies and internal ways of operating. So that was an interesting little thing. And the other thing that was interesting was to look at ordered versus shipping, because again, this is coming out of inventory. We were trying to figure out if there were any differences in how customers were ordering and how long it was taking product to ship. So there didn't seem to be a significant difference there. And with customer B, again, rebate, 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 huge spikes, huge spikes, huge spikes. So basically after a rebate, after they get this peak order, then they're just basically blowing through the order, and then when the rebate comes again, they peak up their orders, and then when the rebate comes again. So 3 times a year this organization had rebates. So good to know, right? So then one of the things they discovered was that about 70% of the uneven demand was because of their own rebate policy and their customer incentives. 20% was due to the way the sales force was being given commission, and 10% was the customer themselves giving special sales to consumers of the product. And so, you know, initially when this team got together on day one, they just assumed that it was the customer doing everything, and that the customer was the one that, you know, was causing their pain organizationally. And in fact, in both cases, you know, you have basically 90% of the, oh, I'm sorry, this should be 90%. So 90% of the reasons ended up with a little interview data from customers, and with a little more data from the sales team, ended up being internally driven. And this happens a lot where we think it's external, but we know that we find out it's internal. So, we've met the enemy, and it is us. It's not the customer. Was Pareto done to identify the vital few reasons? No, and the reason why was because there were only 3 reasons. So, Pareto, you use that when you have lots of possible reasons and you don't know which ones are the highest priority. So, we don't use Pareto typically when there's only 3 reasons. Another question is, what do you do when a manager attending the Kaizen event wants to speak over her employees and the other frontline participants are afraid to speak up? Little out of scope for this particular webinar. I do address it in my other ones, but let me just say a couple quick things about that. Is that typically when they're, in this case, in this particular Kaizen event we're showcasing here, there were frontline people, their boss, and the boss of the boss. So there were 3 levels on the team, and that is tricky, no doubt. So beforehand, I talked to all 3 parties and made sure that all 3 parties understood that their role is on equal turf. There is no rank in a Kaizen event, and that the frontline people were chosen for a reason, and that we really wanted to hear their thoughts. When I went to the boss of the boss, I said, look, you're used to being in a pretty senior role here, and you're used to making a lot of decisions, and this is not your role in this Kaizen event, and you have to honor that. And he said, I will. And then the same with the other boss. And it worked pretty well. If you're clear up front, and if you call people on it the minute they deviate a little bit from that rule they've agreed to, then they can usually get into that habitual rank has no privilege model pretty quickly. So you just have to be very clear, and you have to make sure that you don't pick a wallflower that's not going to speak up at all. You want to pick some pretty verbal people that aren't going to let the fact that their boss is there necessarily destroy them. But I also only put bosses on the team when it makes sense to have bosses on the team. So be maybe more directive on who you want on the team. That's a facilitator's role, is to advise team composition. Okay, so we've met the enemy and it is us. So what are we going to do about it? Well, day 2, the team designed a new sales incentive to run by the leadership team. And by the way, on the day 1 briefing, this was the big aha for all of leadership, because this particular briefing had the entire senior leadership team, and most of them had been involved with value stream mapping, and most of them had exited value stream mapping thinking that it was going to be very difficult to get their customers to order level orders, because they thought it was all about the customer and we can't control the customer. And so this was a great briefing on day 1 to go, wow, we had no idea that we were the ones driving most of this. So day 2, we started with, okay, so how are we going to change this? I mean, if we're the ones that are causing the problem, then what do we do to get rid of the problem? So a new sales incentive or commission structure for the sales team was one of the deliverables, and then a new customer incentive program was another deliverable. And then there was a separate session vetting it with leadership prior to the briefing on day 2 to make sure that the team wasn't completely off course. And that was ended up being a very important one. Even the CEO was involved in that particular vetting process. So here's what they ended up with. For current state, they had these monthly invoice promotions, which were on every time the customer got an invoice, there'd be some sort of a discount that they could do right at the end of the month when they're getting their invoice, and the team decided that they would have no more monthly promotions. And there was about an hour-and-a-half discussion around, is that going to hurt the customers, and are they going to be unhappy about this? And so about halfway through it, I said, it's time to get voice of the customer. And we had identified up front some customers they had close working relationships with, and so some of the salespeople in the team called the customers in the middle of the Kaizen event and said, hey, what if we get rid of these monthly promotions, but we give you something even better? And the customers were, by and large, pretty open to the fact that those monthly promotions were actually more of a bother to them than anything. And then the rebate, same thing. They were, very concerned, understandably, that customers would say, I want my rebates. But what they did was they came up with this new, very, very innovative promotion where each customer could get up to 2% off every single month. And 1% of that would come from the level orders. So in other words, they were incenting the customers to order evenly, 22.5 to 27.5% each week. And then 1% of the promotion would come from the customer moving product out of the warehouse. So what they wanted to do was get the stock rotating more frequently at the customer so that they could rotate their stock more frequently. So this is when you start connecting up, and supply chain starts becoming very important in the big scheme of a whole enterprise-wide value stream, looking at the whole enterprise part of it. And sure enough, the customers they called were thrilled with this idea. By the way, they had done a customer survey before the Kaizen event and already had gotten some early kind of information that customers would be open to some changes. So they already, started, I call it greasing the skids. They already started talking with some of their largest customers about how what this spike in orders, what it was causing for them, and how that was then hurting the customer in the end. So there was a really good job at talking with customers up front. So here's what ended up happening. So current state, what they did was, this was the current state percentages. This is way generalized, but it was pretty close to this pretty consistently, that was the swing in the demand, 40% the last week. And their current commission structure, of the commission they got, 80% of it was based on sales targets, and 20% of it was what they call an operations piece of the equation. And this is to try to get sales and operations working together better and trying to help production from the sales perspective. So in this case, they needed to make sure the customer was never out of stock. That's what OOS is. They needed to minimize the amount of return goods with the customer. They needed to make sure that the customer had the must-have SKUs or part numbers. And they needed to make sure the customers had an effective sales outlet for actually turning product and moving product. And so 20% of the commission came from that. So here's what's really interesting. In the current state, the commission was 15 grand if they additional to salary, if they reached 100% of their target, and 18,000 if they reached 110% of their target. So in the future state, in order to get sales and operations working together better, 40% of their incentive is now coming out of this even flow perspective. So this is getting the customers to order evenly. So big part of their incentive is now based on getting those orders coming in evenly. Only 10% of their sales target is now part of their commission. It was 80% before. And 50% of their commission is now based on operations. So again, you see that now sales is starting to align with the operations, with production and production planning and inventory management, warehouse and shipping. Everybody's starting to align together in order to release this uneven problem. And in this case, they added $5,000 to the base salary. They reduced the commission, but because they added that $5,000 to the base salary, that's what got sales very excited about this. So, we aren't 100% sure if overall it's going to be a little bit more of an outlay to sales, a little less or about the same, but it seems like it's going to be about the same, but, time will tell. The other thing they decided was to not roll it out across the whole board. They decided to just pilot it in, which is very wise, in one region, and they're going to run a 2-month pilot to see what happens to the orders. And then after that 2 months, they'll either, scratch it altogether, adjust it a bit, or roll it out to additional regions. So it remains to be seen because this is real time. I'm talking, that they needed the rest of April to do some preparation from a systems perspective, and then they're going to run a 2-month pilot May and June. Let me take a couple more questions here. How did they track if their customers were moving product? Their sales force is physically on site once a week. And so they're physically looking at the customer's warehouse and looking at the product. So that's how they know if they're moving product. Well, and they can tell just based on the numbers too. They get reports. And then the other question is, were these changes prioritized from a big number of proposed changes using PACE? No. And that's another thing, is that, a lot of people hear about one Kaizen event and the fact that the team comes up with all these brainstormed ideas and they have to be prioritized, and using the PACE chart that many of you have seen that I use. It's in all of our books. Every single book has a PACE chart in it, I think. but no, I mean, there weren't a lot of options considered here because that's not the kind of problem it was. So you see, there are all kinds of different Kaizen events. That's why I wanted to show this one, because I think this is a really different kind of Kaizen event, but very, very effective. So then, day 3, what they did was they developed talking points, and it was a document for having conversations with the customers in that region 3, and that was developed primarily through the sales reps, and then the director and the manager, really only put a couple of final touches on it, but the 2 sales reps on the team did the bulk of that work. And then while they were doing that work, because I tend to break the teams into sub-teams, while they were doing that work, the boss and the boss of the boss, manager and the director, and a couple of the production planning and demand planning people were creating the incentive plan detail. And then they also created a monitoring plan for the pilot. And then about noon on day 3, it was rolled out to the salespeople in region 3. And they were trained on how to talk with the customers, and there was a Q&A document created of like, what if they say this, what do you say, and what if they say this, what do you say, and it was a really well done document. And then from 4 to 5 on day 3, we had the final presentation and celebration, and this was the first Kaizen event this organization had. And people were just amazed that they were able to do all that analysis and get through planning, call customers, talk with HR, get finance to agree, get HR to agree, all of these things in 3 days. And so right now they are rolling out. We have a status call next week to hear how it's going, but the emails I'm getting say that the customers are loving it. They love that 2% every month. So, what a great way to get a win-win where the customers are happy, the organization is able to get more, chaos reduction in place, and salespeople are happy. I mean, I don't know anyone who's unhappy at this point, so it's a pretty good outcome. Let me take another question. It appears that this company did not think their salespeople actually had much impact on overall sales volume since they were willing to adjust the commission plan to incentivize operational goals over revenue goals. Oh, no. Okay, let me talk a little bit about this. So traditional sales commissions do fly in the face of lean thinking because traditional sales, it's all about sales and pushing product. And in a lean operation, you connect everything, and you don't want order spikes. And what traditional commission plans do is they incent sales spikes. And, you get what you measure, and you get what you incent. And so a lot of lean organizations are starting to rethink their sales commission structures so that they can get more level demand and have the sales team be more of a partner with the operation instead of them being only sales thinking. So it's about the whole. It's about the whole company working well together. And there's been traditionally, most of you are probably aware of this, some pretty big tension between sales and operations, especially in manufacturing. But it exists in all industries. And, that tension really doesn't need to exist. I mean, there always needs to be a little bit of a push-pull on, what the customer wants versus what the operation can supply. And I think that's how companies stay innovative, but you don't want the amount of tension that has existed historically. And this is a wonderful way for sales and operations to come together for the greater good and do the right thing by the company and by the customers. So it's a beautiful thing. So they do have a ton of impact on sales volume, a ton. Okay, so next steps for this particular Kaizen event is we are having status calls every other week with the full Kaizen team, and that's going to happen through June. And then we are just now starting to plan 2 additional Kaizen events for June, and they're going to be very, very meaty ones. It's implementing pool-based production so that we can, instead of forecasting, get production based on actual use. And then we're going to, there's a whole series of problems being solved using A3 management that are, we're coaching the team, and so we're going to be doing that as well. And then the big events will be in June whenever we get back on site and we're able to get the second round of Kaizen events done. So that is it for this one kind of different type of Kaizen event that I wanted to share with you. I'd love to start taking some questions because we've got about 10 minutes now. And then some of you did give questions when you registered. I wanted to go through those quickly as well. how did the event sustain? How did they communicate the new process to other team members? So in this case, 2 of the sales team were on the Kaizen team, and then there were about 5, 6 others that needed to learn about the new process, and that was all done virtually. So it was done by phone call. They received the talking points documents in an email, and then there was a phone call. There was a really great conversation and Q&A about it, and so it was all done virtually. In most Kaizen events, it's not done virtually, it's done on site, and if there's a big global company with a very big rollout of an improvement, then oftentimes we use a train-the-trainer model. So that's how it's communicated, and people learn the new process. There's a whole lot more to it than that. You need a process owner, you need someone actively monitoring, you need an audit, to make sure that the new process is working, and then there needs to be continuous improvement in place. So there's a whole lot to getting events to sustain. But again, if you want to take a look at some of my other webinars, if you look at the Kaizen event ones, you can tell based on the title that some of them are much more sustain-oriented. And then when planning for a Kaizen event, what are the criteria for selecting a swim lane or VSM as the best process clarification definition tool? So I believe that VSM should never, ever, ever, ever be part of a Kaizen event. Value stream maps are for a different audience. They're strategic versus tactical, and it should be done at least a month, if not months before a Kaizen event, because it's the big blueprint, the big strategic plan for making transformation. Once you get into a Kaizen event, if mapping is needed, process level mapping, I prefer swim lane style, is what's needed. And then in terms of an output or a deliverable from a Kaizen event, sometimes a process flow chart with decision trees is also good to standardize the decision process. So we talk about this in our book too, in the value stream mapping, is that value stream mapping should never be done in a Kaizen event. Okay, how do we decide that it's necessary to do a Kaizen event, and what indicators do we have? I think I covered that okay in the beginning, but let me know, whoever asked that, if you want a little more clarification on that question. Okay, let's go. Ooh, lots of questions. Let's go back to the questions. Here, one more thing. So this is a list of all of the things that you can do for analyzing and documenting the current state. This is a relationship to this question about the swim lane process map versus a VSM. So you'll notice the VSM is not on here. But there are lots of things. You might want to look at, product samples and do interviews and spaghetti diagrams if you're looking at motion reduction, those types of things, always going to the Gemba or at least talking to, people. So there's a pretty wide range of options you've got for documenting and analyzing the current state. And then I also wanted to mention, if you are interested in metrics-based process mapping or the swim lane style mapping, we do have a book out on that. So some of you are new, and I didn't know if you knew about that book. We have 4 books out now, so that was book number 2. Okay, to the questions. So with regards to culture, what made this organization initiate a Kaizen event? Okay, so I'm not sure if you were on in the very beginning. Let me just really quickly go back to the beginning of the webinar. Let's see, here we go. So this particular, this particular organization decided that they wanted to transform a value stream. They wanted to, they're growing quickly. They didn't share this. They're growing quickly, and they wanted to be able to produce more efficient and effective product. They didn't want to be buying new plants all over the world as they looked like they were going to be heading to. So they just really wanted to implement lean from a cultural perspective and from a results perspective. So this is the value stream map. These are the different bursts of different improvements that need to be made in order to realize this future state and have it become their current state. And this is the red arrow here is the Kaizen event that I just profiled. So it was part of the transformation plan. And then to take a look at transformation plans, you can divide up the work that needs to be done by Kaizen event, project, just do it, or RPE, which is something that a client of mine dubbed many years ago, which stands for rapid planning event. So that's why the client decided to do the Kaizen event. Okay, let me go back to the end. There we go. Okay, next question. Would you please explain the difference between the A3 problem solving and value stream mapping transformation? Okay, so let me see. I'm going to actually go to my other screen for a moment, so please hold. Let me see if I can find this quickly. Let's see. Let's see. I know where I put it. Hang on. I just did this on the road, and I haven't been back much, so hang on. Let me move over all these things so I can see. Okay, here we go. So documents, lean, transformation. Da-da-da. I feel like we should be doing the Jeopardy theme song. Oh, shoot, where is it? Nope, not there. Well, I may not be able to find it. So hopefully some of you are on social media and I can post it. Let me just do a quick search here. So I'm going to search for Kaizen Event Value Stream Map A3. Okay, so hang on. And then it should be one of the most recent dates. Okay, let me go back to questions, see if I can grab the questions back and that while I'm doing the search. Oh, of course it won't let me search while I'm doing that. Okay, so hang on. Kaizen A3 value stream map. Okay. It was really, it's the first time I've finally put a visual together showing the relationship between everything. Okay, so see more results. There we go. All right, final presentation combined. This might be it. Let's see. If I can't find it right here, then I'm going to go back to questions. PowerPoint is opening very slowly. It's coming. All right, while it's opening, let me go back to questions. Could you please explain what is 50% for operations, 50% of sales? Okay, so hang on one second. Let me... Okay, I'm giving up on that slide. So either you can email me and I'll send you a picture of it when I find it, or if you're on social media, I'll post it on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and I'll probably have another webinar on it as well in the next couple of months. So let me go back to the 50%. I think you're referring to the value stream map. So let's go back to that. Okay, here we go. So I think you're referring to this 50%. Is that what you're referring to? Ashok, if you can let me know, is that what you're referring to? Well, let me explain what this is. So this is 50% of the orders, or 50% of the invoices, I'm sorry, are being paid directly through the salesperson collecting the payment when they're on site with the customer. Remember I said that they're there once a week, and that 50% of them in the future state will come through e-payment, ETF. And that was not the case in the current state. There was no ETF yet. Everybody was still paying by check, and so this organization is just now implementing that. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's see. What else on questions? I think that looks like that might be it on the questions. Is there anybody that is still writing something? If you're still writing something and want to just raise your hand, because it's 12:15 my time now, so we're done. But if you're still writing a question, raise your hand so I know that you're still writing, and I'll hold on for another minute. Looks like we might be done. Okay, so back to, let me go here. If you want to drop an email, you can get on my website and drop me an email, and I'll send you the visual. So what the visual is going to show is A3 problem solving as it relates to value stream mapping. And one of the things that you'll see, just in case we don't talk directly, is that an A3 report that's used to reflect the plan, do, study, adjust problem solving, if the problem's big enough, it could necessitate the development of a value stream map to understand the current state if the problem's big enough. On the other hand, when you do a value stream map and you have the transformation plan in place, you may see a problem on the value stream map, but you have no idea what the root cause is of it yet, and you know that that needs to be solved in order to realize the future state. And in that case, it may be a great candidate for plan, do, study, adjust, and using A3 reports as a means to reflect that process and have a person be coached through problem solving, which is the purpose of A3 reports. So in either case, you know, you can have one be a subset of the other, and then Kaizen events are typically an outcome of a value stream mapping transformation plan, because we don't want them to be in you know, just in a silo all by themselves. And they could also be part of an A3, as I mentioned in the beginning and showed that one A3 report. It could also be part of that. So you can have A3s, you know, result in value stream maps. You can have value stream maps result in A3s, and you can have Kaizen events result from either one. Because remember, all a Kaizen event is a specific way of executing rapid improvement. So thank you so much for everyone, and I would love to hear back from you when you exit. If you could please just, you know, put some comments on the little survey. It's a very quick 3-question survey. That's always helpful for us. We do continuous improvement here pretty intensely at the Karen Martin Group, and I hope you have a great day or evening wherever you are, and look forward to seeing you at another webinar. Don't forget to sign up if you're not already a subscriber. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.